Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Whispering Gentleman. So flick off the lights, sit down in your comfortable chair, and grab a glass of your favorite drink as we dive on in. I stumbled upon a gas station on an empty highway several years ago. That night at the gas station still haunts me today. But not necessarily. I had been driving on the empty highway for a couple hours in my car. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the car let out a ding to let me know that the fuel was running low. I was tired. Very tired. It had definitely not been a good idea to decide to take a drive home at night instead of booking a room in a motel. I looked at the never-ending road and the thick forest lining along it. The headlights illuminated what was otherwise the darkest night I'd ever seen. Not a single star dotted the dark cloud-dominated sky. There was no one on the road, and the monotony of the same forest mile after mile was starting to take a toll on me. I watched as the forest blurred beside me after I steadily pressed my foot on the accelerator. There must have been a gas station somewhere around here. I spotted one, right between the lines of trees that populated either side of the road. It stuck out like a sore thumb amongst the dark trees. Dim lights did a poor job of illuminating the station and gave it a run-down, neglected feel. I ignored all red flags as I pulled up to the station and parked my car in one of the bays to refuel it. The dim white lights overhead seemed to give me a slight migraine. They were intensely white, but very dim. I saw no other cars in the bay. The gas pump was old and slightly damaged, but it did the job and filled my tank. After filling my car, I started to walk towards the convenience store to pay. The heavy glass doors were unlocked and the lights inside were on. I pushed open the door and walked inside. The place felt like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. A retro tiled floor combined the products that I either hadn't heard of or were from old brands led me to this conclusion. The shopkeeper caught me staring at the aisles of old products that had been discontinued a long time ago and spoke. "Is there anything wrong, sir?" he asked, making me jump. I had somehow only noticed his presence now, and even he represented the 80s, having dressed in a striped button-up shirt and slacks. He sported an impressive mustache, thin spectacles, and had an air of mystery around him. No. Just came here to pay for the gas and, buy a coffee? I said, still collecting myself. I walked over to the counter while filling my pockets to search for my wallet. I must have left it back at the car. I'll be right back. I forgot my wallet, I told the shopkeeper. He flashed me a knowing smile. There was something wrong with his teeth, but I didn't register it as I quickly whipped around to go to my car. They were rotting as I stepped out of the convenience store and began my walk towards my car, when I noticed I wasn't getting any closer to my car. It didn't make sense. There was a short distance between my car and the shop, yet no matter how much I walked, I covered no distance. It was like the ground had turned into a treadmill, and no matter how far I walked, I never got closer to my car. I looked behind me and realized I was still a step or two from the entrance of the convenience store. I saw the shopkeeper staring at me through the glass doors with an indescribable expression. His face was neutral, yet the way his eyes focused on me fueled a strong sense of apprehension within my soul. I ran, now more frantic than before. Paying for the fuel was no longer a priority. I wanted to get to my car and book it. It was all futile. No matter how fast I ran, I never made it to my car. The nightmare didn't stop. How long do you think you would have kept running in my situation? I was defeated, and knew I could not fight whatever force was acting upon this place. I had made a mistake of ever stopping by, and now I was paying for it. The very laws of physics were being bent in this place, and I still could not understand how walking forward never seemed to help me actually physically move forward. Panic surged through my veins as my desire to free myself from this loop grew into an animalistic urge for survival. Nothing worked. I could only have run for so long before I collapsed, unable to run any further. When faced with this defeat, I had no choice but to walk back inside the convenience store and face the shopkeeper, who had continually stared at me throughout the struggle. As I turned around, I seemed to snap out of that cycle, and my steps actually allowed me to move forward. I burst through the glass doors and screamed at the shopkeeper. "What is happening?" He smiled, a wide smile that stretched from ear to ear. There was something wrong with his mustache. I squinted and noticed that it was pulsating and worthing with maggots. There were dozens of them, wriggling around in his bushy mustache and climbing into his nostrils. My scream echoed several times in the small convenience store and was followed by the shopkeeper's hysterical laugh. I tried to run out of the glass doors again and slammed my body against them to open them. They didn't budge. The blow knocked the wind out of my body, causing my lungs to feel like deflated balloons. A dull, excruciating pain spread across my entire torso. My vision swam, and I lay there on the floor struggling to recover. I don't know how long I lay there as the waves of pain flowing through my torso began to fade away. But when I found the strength to get back up off the floor and look around, the shopkeeper was gone. The place looked near, like it had been constructed a couple months ago. The cobwebs that once stretched over the shelves were now gone, and the tiled floor was whiter. The fluorescent lights above also seemed to shine brighter. A deep, primal instinct to escape resided in my gut, but the glass doors wouldn't open no matter how hard I pushed against them, like they were held in place by a physical barrier. I stared through the glass at my car, and I suddenly wanted to be out of there in the cool night air instead of being trapped inside this gas station. It felt as if the outside resided in a different dimension, and the interdimensional barrier between the glass and the outside kept me from going back outside. It was a viable theory, considering how old this place seemed when I walked in, only to have it suddenly renewed as if time itself had ticked back. A low moan reverberated through the air, catching my attention immediately. My thoughts about my current dilemma completely flew out of my head as the sound caused every single one of my senses to stand on end. I slowly looked behind me and noticed a corpse behind me. The body was burnt. The skin was charred and black in some places, and red and raw in the others. The face of the corpse was completely disfigured. Her left eye was missing. Part of her seemed to have melted onto the floor due to the extreme heat. I jumped back and had a strong urge to empty my stomach onto the floor. Bile rose to the back of my throat, but I swallowed it back down. I slowly walked away from the corpse and turned around into the aisle to avoid it. I could not bear looking at the body without feeling the pain the person must have felt as they were burnt alive. Much to my dismay, I nearly stepped on another burnt corpse in the next aisle. It was similar to the last one and finally gave my stomach the push it needed to empty all of its contents onto the floor. A significant portion of my vomit landed on the burnt corpse itself and seeped into the burnt and separated tissues. I started to gag even more violently at the sight of the scene, but my stomach had nothing else to expel. Walking into another aisle led me to the third and final corpse in this place. Those poor people seemed to have all been burnt in this place. There was no evidence of a fire ever occurring in the convenience store as I walked around it though, and I obviously would have always burnt to my demise had there been a fire a short while ago. These bodies seemed to have peered within the disappearance of the shopkeeper. I heard movement behind me. This was followed by the sound of something being dragged against the floor. It almost had a squeak to it, as if a wet, heavy sponge was being pushed over the tiles. I stood completely frozen in fear. Suddenly, something grabbed at my leg. More shuffling sounds followed from my left. Another thing grabbed my leg. It felt like a hand. Its grip was weak and faltering. My heart skipped a beat as the third had joined them and gripped at my leg. I was frozen in fear, and my heart was violently bashing against my chest. It felt like I was having a heart attack. "Help us!" 3 mangled voices moaned. Then they used their hands to slowly climb up my legs and stand up using me as support. I still couldn't see what was grabbing at me as they were behind me. A mixture of dry, burnt flesh and a wet, pus-filled wounds rubbed against my bare hand as one of them reached up and grabbed at my hand. I slowly turned my head to look down at what was grabbing me and came face to face with the lifeless eyes of the burnt corpse. All 3 of them were focused on standing up by slowly crawling up my body. This somehow snapped me out of my paralysis. I shook them off me like a scorpion had gotten into my pants and lunged forward, nearly falling on the floor myself. It was then that I realized that a fire had started to spread throughout the place. The black smoke reduced my visibility and made it incredibly hard to see. The corpses continued to crawl towards me, inch by inch, as the fire began to consume every inch of the store. Unbearable heat radiated onto my skin and deep into my body as I began to slowly burn in this hell. I ran aimlessly through the store as the fire looked at me and extended its tendrils to consume me. It felt as if layers of my skin were starting to melt off. I bumped against a solid surface and felt a burning metal handle on my stomach. In desperation, I burnt my hand to turn that handle and opened the door. I found myself in a toilet. The fire had not spread through here, but smoke was licking in through the sides of the door. I may not die in the fire, but I would soon succumb to suffocation. What was happening to me? I struggled to come up with an explanation in my mind for the predicament I found myself in. I had walked into a gas station to pay for my fuel, and now suddenly this place was on fire. Where did the shopkeeper go to? And why were there maggots in his face? Where had the corpses appeared from? The rising temperature of the enclosed room snapped me out of my thoughts and urged me to take action. I spotted a medium-sized window right above the toilet that I could break and use to get out of the store. I smashed the glass with my fist and punched it several more times to clear the window. Shards of glass were embedded into my knuckles, but my primal need for survival kept me going. The window was just barely big enough for me to crawl through. My head went through easily. It felt like crawling through a shark's teeth. Glass stabbed into me and formed long slices as I pushed myself out through the window. I hadn't removed all the glass from the window, and the sharp bits remaining on the edges dug into me and drew linear cuts on my whole body. My entire torso was burning in pain, and as I continued to push myself through the window with all my strength, I started to wonder whether dying in the fire would have been less painful. I managed to get myself through, though, except I hadn't accounted for one thing. Since I dove headfirst out of the window, there was no way for me to land on my feet. I could swear I heard my skull crack open as my head slammed against the asphalt. As I heard the dull thud of my body hitting the floor after, my vision started to tunnel. In one single moment, I felt the pain across my entire raw, burnt, and cut body. In the next moment, that pain seemed to lift me off as my consciousness faded away like a candle being blown. Several days later, I found myself waking up in a hospital, surrounded by the beeps of machinery. I was covered from head to toe in casts, and my entire body hurt. The doctors told me I was found outside of an old abandoned gas station. They speculated my body had been dumped by a supposed kidnapper who had tortured me to death and tried to burn my body as well. They told me I had brain damage and severe memory loss when I tried to tell them the true story. I was a traumatized maniac to them. I managed to recover in the hospital as months and years passed. After I successfully went through rehabilitation, only my physical and mental scars remained. Today, I drove to that same gas station. The window that I had crawled out of that horrific night several years ago was still broken. I didn't stop there, and instead continued driving. As I passed the gas station, I saw that same shopkeeper I had met the night staring at me through the glass double doors with a malicious smile spread across his face. If you like this story, be sure to check out more stories by Not Necessarily, linked in the description below. As always, sleep tight and stay terrified.